Ye three sisters of fate. Threads in the dark. It begins with silence, or rather, the kind of quiet that hums with hidden life. Imagine ancient Greece at night. The stars shimmer like the gleam of polished bronze, scattered across an infinite tapestry. Somewhere, a torch sputters in a small village. A storyteller clears their throat, ready to speak of things greater than kings, gods, or heroes. They speak of the Moirae, the three sisters of fate, who spin, measure, and cut the threads of all life. They are older than Zeus, older than time's rhythm. Every birth, every breath, every last heartbeat, all are woven by their unseen hands. Fate, in their world, wasn't a choice you could make or a force you could escape. It was the pattern beneath everything, silent and certain. The Greeks called them muomikron rho alpha iota, a word that simply meant parts or shares. Each human being, no matter how powerful or humble, was thought to receive a share of existence measured by these divine weavers. I've often wondered what comfort the ancients found in that idea. Maybe it was the relief of knowing that life, however unpredictable it felt, was not chaos but a design. Or maybe it was fear that everything, every joy or tragedy, was locked in from the start. To meet the Moirae is to meet the boundaries of what it means to be human. They are not evil nor kind. They simply are. They do not argue, they do not forgive, they do not explain. They weave. At the loom stands Clotho, the youngest, who spins the thread of life from nothing, from air, light, or perhaps divine mystery. With every turn of her spindle, a new existence begins. Beside her is Lachesis, who measures that thread, choosing how long it shall run and what twists it may take. And finally, Atropos, the eldest, still, steady, uncompromising, who cuts the thread when its time has come. Her name means unalterable. Once she moves her shears, there is no appeal to gods or men. Their tools are simple: a spindle, a rod, a pair of shears. Yet their power governs everything from a drifting leaf to the fall of empires. But these figures are not just goddesses of doom. They are artists too, weavers of the ultimate design. Every life, every fate, adds color and pattern to the vast cosmic fabric. That idea that our stories, even brief or painful ones, contribute to something greater remains profoundly human. Tonight we'll travel through that tapestry. We'll trace the threads from the first spinner's hand to the final cut. We'll explore who the Moirae were in myth and what they reveal about how people understand destiny, freedom, and death. Because to understand the Moirae is to look into the mirror of time itself, and to ask quietly, how much of the life we live is ours to choose? Clotho the Spinner. When the dawn first broke upon the mountains of Arcadia, the Greeks believed the light itself was spun from the fingers of a goddess. It shimmered and curled, stretching across the valleys like silk caught in a morning breeze. That was Clotho's work. The spinner, the youngest of the sisters, the one who begins all stories. To the ancient imagination, creation was not a flash or a command from above. It was a continuous act, the steady twirl of thread between divine fingers. The spindle never stops. Even as one life ends, another is drawn from the void. Clotho's name comes from the Greek kappa lambda theta omega, meaning to spin. She stands at the very cusp between nothingness and being. In the philosophy of later centuries, she came to symbolize potential, the raw, unwoven moment of birth, the first inhalation of existence. If you listen carefully to the oldest myths, beginnings in Greek thought are rarely loud or dramatic. They emerge quietly, from shadow, from night, from formlessness. Hesiod, one of the earliest poets, spoke of chaos, the great yawning gap, and from it came Gaia, earth, and Eros, desire. But alongside these primordial forces came the invisible hands that would later weave their offspring's destinies, the Moirae. Even before there were stories to tell, there was already a pattern to be followed. When a child was born, the Greeks imagined a small ceremony. Somewhere unseen, Clotho turned her spindle, Lachesis measured a bit of the new thread, and Atropos waited, patient, eternal, until her time would come. The family might celebrate, but somewhere in that joy was the awareness that fate had already taken notice. I often think of Clotho's work as the universe's most intimate gesture, the moment a thread first appears between her fingertips. It's not just biological birth she governs, but the beginning of every journey. An idea, a friendship, a chance meeting on a crowded street. Each one a new strand, thin and trembling, soon to be woven into the vast tapestry of everything else. In that sense, Clotho invites us to think about beginnings not as accidents, but as acts of weaving choices and circumstances intertwined. In our modern world, we like to think of ourselves as self-made, masters of our own start. Yet even now, chance, history, and timing still spin invisible threads beneath our steps. In art, Clotho was often painted as a serene young woman holding a spindle or distaff, her eyes lowered in focus. The threads she spun were sometimes golden, sometimes shadowed, representing how fortune and hardship alike begin in the same motion. Her youth, I think, suggests innocence more than control. She doesn't decide what to create. She merely brings potential into form. The act itself is automatic, ageless, unjudging. Across cultures, the symbol of the spinner appears again and again. In Norse myth, the Norns Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld perform a similar task, tending to the roots of the world tree and weaving destiny into its bark. In Hindu cosmology, the goddess Maya spins the illusion of reality itself. Even in literature, we return to this image of spinning, threading, creating. To spin is to begin. Maybe that's why so many creation myths feel familiar, as if we already know how they'll go. All stories, after all, begin the same way, with a twist of potential, a movement out of stillness. We are made, and in being made, our story begins. There's something tender in Clotho's image. This idea of a divine figure who takes us from nothingness into being and whispers, "Now live." It's the first of 3 steps. Spin, measure, cut, birth, life, death, and like a wheel it turns again and again. But the thread Clotho spins isn't smooth, can snag, fray, even knot upon itself. Some mythographers said she sometimes spun with trembling hands, or that the material she worked with resisted her pull, as if the souls about to be born already carried the shadows of what they'd become. Perhaps even the gods, too, had such threads. Zeus himself could not escape the design, though he, out of pride, often pretended otherwise. When we think of fate, we often fear the finality of it, that whatever is spun will end as it must. But Clotho's part of the story is about beginnings, not conclusions. And beginnings, no matter how small or fragile, always hold the shimmer of infinite possibility. Before the measurement, before the cut, there is only thread, raw, unwritten, full of maybe. And so, if you find yourself standing on the edge of something new, a change, a hope, a decision, imagine, for a moment, the goddess Clotho at work, drawing your life's next strand from the vastness of the dark. Maybe she hums softly as she spins. Maybe she pauses now and then to look up and watch where the thread stretches, amused at how it catches the light. Because in the end, every thread is different, every beginning unique, but all come from the same loom. Atropos, the unturning. Somewhere, in the quiet of the loom, a sound changes. The steady rhythm of spinning and measuring begins to slow. Threads that once danced in the sister's hands grow still. And there, beside her patient siblings, stands Atropos, the eldest, the unyielding, the one who holds the shears. Her name means the unturning one, or she who cannot be swayed. She doesn't weave and she doesn't measure. She waits, and when the pattern has run its course, she cuts the thread clean. No hesitation, no cruelty, simply purpose. In art, Atropos is often shown less ethereal than her sisters. Older, sterner, her gaze unwavering. Sometimes she carries a scroll of destinies already fulfilled. More often, she holds a pair of glinting shears, polished by endless use. Even in depictions from ancient vases, you feel the quiet stillness around her, that sense of arrival, of inevitability. When Atropos moves, everything else stops. The Greeks never saw her as a villain. Death to them wasn't evil, it was a law as necessary as birth or breath. The fear of Atropos came not from malice, but from finality. Once she lifted her blades, not even Zeus could intervene. The poets used her name as a synonym for the end itself. When Atropos had visited, there was nothing more to say. Yet, for all her severity, she was sometimes compared to a midwife, not of life but of release. The act of cutting wasn't violence. It was transformation. The soul, freed from its thread, rejoined the unseen world, perhaps to be spun again when Clotho's spindle turned once more. The Greeks believed in cycles. Spring from winter, dawn from dusk. Death was the pause between. Atropos, then, was not destruction but renewal's threshold. If you listen closely to how people speak of endings, even today, you can hear her rhythm echoing through our language. We cut ties. We close chapters. We tie loose ends. We have inherited the loom. For heroes, meeting Atropos was often the climax of their legend. When Achilles fell before Troy's walls, his mother cried that Atropos herself had moved too soon. When Oedipus blinded himself at Colonus, it was said that Atropos, in pity, sent death not as punishment, but as peace. For some she arrives early, for others mercifully late, but to all she comes. What fascinates me about Atropos is her silence. Clotho spins with gentle chatter. Lachesis hums while measuring. But Atropos says nothing. There are no bargains to make, no speeches to give. Only the soft snip, like the wind through a closing door. She doesn't pause over what has been spun. She respects it in her own way by finishing it exactly as it was meant to be. In that silence, I think the Greeks found both fear and wisdom. Fear because nothing defines mortality more clearly than a limit. Wisdom because within that limit lies the meaning of everything. If the thread never ended, the pattern would blur. The design would lose shape. The cut, painful as it is, gives form to what came before. Atropos reminds us that even the gods are bound by time. The ancients told of moments when Zeus, mighty as he was, glanced toward the weaver's hall in dread, knowing that one day even Olympus might change. For the Greeks, even eternity wasn't safe from necessity. But the thought of inevitability doesn't have to darken us. It can also brighten the hours we have. Imagine, for a moment, that Atropos stands somewhere beyond your sight, not hovering, simply present, distant but real. Every morning you wake, she doesn't move. She watches. Every evening when you rest, she still does not cut. And someday, when she finally does, all that remains is the pattern you've made. That perspective can turn even ordinary days into something sacred. Writers and philosophers have returned to Atropos for centuries. In Renaissance art, she became a figure of memento mori, the gentle reminder to live fully because life ends. In modern literature, she shows up in every character who accepts mortality with grace, who looks at the end and says, "I am ready." In that way, Atropos isn't just the end of life. She is the beginning of meaning. The awareness of her presence sharpens our choices. She makes the fleeting precious. Perhaps the greatest comfort of all lies in her fairness. Atropos doesn't judge by wealth or power. Her shears move with perfect equality, for kings and beggars alike. In her hands, every thread looks the same, no thicker, no brighter. And when she cuts, she leaves no mark of preference. As evening settles over our imagined loom, and the light begins to fade, I picture her standing among the falling threads, silent, composed, almost gentle. Around her, the tapestry glows faintly, as though lit from within. She examines it once, nods slightly, and turns away. Her work is done. The world, for one more moment, is perfectly still. There's a strange peace in that stillness. Perhaps that is why the Greeks, though they feared death, did not despair of it. The Moirae remind us that endings, too, are part of the divine craft. Not interruptions, but completions. If Clotho gives the start and Lachesis gives direction, Atropos gives harmony to the whole. And so the loom rests. The thread is gone, but the pattern remains. The legacy of the Moirae. The Moirae did not disappear with ancient Greece. Their image of three weavers of destiny has lingered like a quiet echo through philosophy, literature, religion, and even modern ideas about free will and determinism. Their loom now stretches across centuries, threaded through stories that no longer mention them by name, but still trace their pattern, ancient roots and meanings. In early Greek religion, the Moirae were the personifications of destiny itself. Clotho the Spinner, Lachesis the Apportioner, and Atropos the unturning cutter of the thread. Hesiod sometimes called them daughters of night, Nyx, linking them to the deep, impersonal forces of death and retribution, and elsewhere as daughters of Zeus and Themis, aligning them with order, justice, and the lawful structure of the cosmos. That double parentage already suggests something important. Fate, in the Greek mind, was both dark and orderly, both terrifying and rational. It was not random chaos, but neither was it gentle providence. It was simply what is given. When poets describe them, they often emphasize their severity. Old, stern women, sometimes lame, holding spindle, staff, and shears, their faces marked by the long familiarity with all human fortunes. Plato and philosophical fate. Centuries after Hesiod, Greek philosophy took the old stories and used them as instruments for thinking about the soul. Plato, in his Republic, offers one of the most striking reinterpretations in the myth of air. There, the Moirae are no longer just distant weavers of human life. They become daughters of necessity, seated beside the spindle of the universe, singing in harmony with the sirens. Lachesis sings the things that were, Clotho the things that are, and Atropos the things that are to be. Around them, souls gather to choose their next lives. A prophet proclaims in Lachesis' name, "Your destiny will not be imposed on you. You will choose it. The responsibility is with the chooser." Lots are cast by Lachesis, giving each soul an order of choice, but the lives themselves of tyrants, ordinary men, animals, quiet thinkers, are selected freely. This is where the old myth reveals a new depth. Fate still exists, the structure, the limits, the consequences, but within that, Plato insists on moral responsibility. The Moirae become guardians of a universe where destiny and choice coexist, where what is allotted and what is chosen are woven together into a single thread. That vision has quietly influenced how later thinkers talk about free will. The idea that there is a lot given genes, birth, era, circumstance, and yet a path to walk within it, still shapes contemporary discussions on freedom and determinism, even when the names of Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos are no longer mentioned. From myth to literature. As Greek religion faded and new worlds of belief arose, the basic image of three fates survived, especially in Roman and later European imagination. The Romans called them Parsi, Nona, Decima, and Morta, preserving the spinner, measurer, and cutter under new names and associating Atropos directly with death. Over time, the three women at the loom became a literary shorthand for destiny. Writers could summon the weight of inevitability with just a reference to the fates cutting a thread. Tragic heroes were not only betrayed by their flaws or enemies, they were remembered as those whose thread had been measured and cut at a precise, unalterable moment. Even when authors did not use the Greek names, they kept the structure. Triples of prophetic or witch-like figures, three weird sisters in Shakespeare's Macbeth, for example, echo the Moirae's pattern. One hinting at beginnings, one at the unfolding of events, one at the end. These later figures speak less of balanced cosmic law and more of moral corruption or temptation, yet their shadow still falls under the old loom. In folklore and fairy tales, spinning and cutting thread often mark turning points. A spindle that pricks a finger, a spinning room, a broken thread. All carry traces of Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. The act of spinning becomes not only a household task but a metaphor for shaping lives, whether through curse, blessing, or hard-earned transformation. Echoes in modern culture. Today, stories of the Moirae slip into novels, films, and games with surprising regularity. Sometimes they appear almost directly as robed figures who control timelines or destinies. Other times they are disguised as cosmic bureaucrats, software-like intelligences calculating probabilities, or mysterious systems that allocate chances and endings. The core symbolism remains recognizable. The thread as a life, the spinning as birth or beginning, the measuring as the stretch of experiences and choices, the cutting as death or irreversible change. In fantasy literature, it is common to see a council of beings who keep the balance of a world, assigning fates or overseeing prophecy. A modern recasting of the Moirae's impartial distribution of good and bad. In science fiction, algorithms and predictive systems sometimes take on a fate-like role, calculating what will happen to individuals based on vast data, invoking questions about how much of life is truly under personal control. Even outside fiction, the language of threads and weaving appears in how people talk about lives. The fabric of society, threads of connection, the tapestry of history. The old loom still hums under our metaphors. Fate, free will, and science. Beyond storytelling, the Moirae resonate with modern debates about determinism. Not in a literal sense, but as a potent image. The idea that there might be a structure to the universe, laws, causes, probabilities that shape our lives from birth to death, feels like a secular echo of the fates' work. Neuroscience raises questions about how much of our behavior is governed by brain chemistry and prior causes. Genetics reveals inherited patterns that influence health, temperament, and even some tendencies of behavior. Social sciences show how economic and cultural conditions constrain what options are realistically available. Each of these, in its own way, sketches a modern measure of our thread. Yet at the same time, ethics, law, and everyday life still insist on responsibility, choice, and moral agency. We hold people accountable, praise courage, condemn cruelty, celebrate resilience. That ongoing tension mirrors the space between Lachesis' allotment and the soul's decision in Plato's myth. Constraints without total imprisonment, freedom without absolute independence. When people say, "It was meant to be," they are not usually invoking a goddess with shears. They are reaching for a sense that some events carry a rightness, a fittingness beyond pure chance. That instinct is very old. It is the same instinct that once imagined three sisters, calm and distant, weaving a pattern too vast for human eyes. Why they still matter. So why do Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos still capture the imagination? Perhaps because they turn an abstract, difficult idea, the mixture of necessity and freedom, into a human, nearly domestic scene. Three women at work, their tools simple, their task endless. In that image, destiny is not a tyrant, but a craft. Life is not a random scramble, but a weaving. And death, though final, is not senseless. It is the clean cut that gives the pattern its shape. Thinking of life as a thread does something gentle to the mind. It reminds us that every beginning carries possibility. Every middle is where choices accumulate. Every ending, however hard, seals a unique design. The Moirae ask, in their quiet way, if your days are a thread on a loom you cannot fully see, what kind of pattern are you making moment by moment within the measure you have been given? Their answer is never spoken aloud. They continue to spin, to measure, to cut, as they have in stories for thousands of years, and as they will in one form or another, for as long as humans wonder how much of their. Returning to the loom, imagine once more the quiet room where the three sisters work. The torches have burned low. The world outside is mostly asleep. The rustle of olive leaves, the distant murmur of the sea, the faint creak of wood as the loom shifts under the weight of 1,000 stories. Clotho's hand has slowed. Fewer new threads glimmer into being tonight, or perhaps it only feels that way because you are more aware of the ones already shining. Lachesis stands with her measuring rod resting lightly against her shoulder, watching lines run their course. Some short and bright, some long and shadowed, some tangled into one another so deeply that you cannot tell where one life ends and another begins. And Atropos waits, as she always does, the curve of her shears catching just a hint of reflected light. From where you sit, you still cannot see the whole pattern. You see only fragments. A thread of war crossing a thread of love. A sudden knot where disaster struck. A soft, pale line where a life passed quietly, almost unnoticed. You might be tempted to ask, is this fair? Is this just? Why some threads glow and others darken? Why some are cut early and others run almost to the edge of the frame? But the Moirae do not answer questions. They simply continue their work. And perhaps that is where your part begins. Not in demanding explanations from the weavers, but in learning how to live with the mystery of the loom. To accept that you will never see the entire tapestry, yet still choose day after day to make your own small section as honest, as kind, as vivid as you can. Think about your life as a thread among countless others. There were moments when Clotho's spinning brought you into contact with someone who changed everything. A conversation, a chance meeting, a door you walked through without knowing why. There were seasons when Lachesis' measure felt unusually tight, when time seemed to close in and choices narrowed. There may have been times when you felt Atropos nearby, in illness, in loss, in the sudden end of something you were not ready to let go. And yet, here you are, still listening, your thread still uncut. For as long as that is true, your story is not finished. You cannot lengthen the thread beyond what it will be, but you can decide, in quiet, practical ways, what will be woven into it, who you care for, what you stand for, how you respond when life does not follow the plan you imagined. The ancient Greeks looked up at a night sky crowded with gods and heroes and said, "Even Zeus is bound by the fates." In that belief, there is an odd kind of freedom. If even the greatest powers must bow to the same law of beginning, middle, and end, then the value of a life is not measured by how much control it has, but by how it is lived within the frame given. So perhaps the question is not, can I escape my fate? Perhaps the question is, how can I walk my path in a way that honors the thread I've been given? Some nights, when the world is quiet and your thoughts wander, you might imagine the loom again. You might picture your own thread there, thin, perhaps, but unmistakably yours, crossing others, touching them, changing their color in ways you may never fully notice. Some crossings are brief, some last for years, some are warm and bright, some burn and break. All of them together make the design. One day, far ahead, Atropos will lift her hand. There will be a final breath, a last word, a closing of the eyes. In that moment, nothing more can be added or taken away. Your thread will be what it is, no longer potential but memory. And yet, the tapestry will remain, carrying the imprint of every choice, every kindness, every wound and every healing that your thread ever touched. Those who come after you will walk across a world subtly shaped by lives like yours, just as you now walk through a world shaped by those who are gone. The Moirae will continue their work. Clotho will spin. Lachesis will measure. Atropos will cut. They were here long before you, and they will be here long after. But for this brief span, this flicker of time between first spin and final cut, the thread is in your hands. Not to control its length, not to rewrite the entire pattern, but to decide, simply and quietly, what you will weave into it while you can. So as the loom fades from view and the night deepens, you return to your own life, to unfinished conversations, to small plans, to the ordinary rhythm of days. The sisters remain at their work, somewhere beyond sight, patient and tireless. And you walk forward along your thread, knowing now that every step, however small, is part of a story vast enough to hold gods and mortals, beginnings and endings, joy and sorrow, all woven together into one great, shining cloth. The Moirae do not speak, but if they did, perhaps they would offer only this: live well within your measure.